very pertinent issue that is on a language, that is a language during Harappan era. We have with us Ms. Bahata Ansubali Mukhopadhyay from Bangalore to deliver a lecture on Pillu, Indus Valley's Elephant Ward, its voyage to Mesopotamia, and its Dravidian root. Language during Indus Valley civilization has been playing a very important role among the scholars from time to time. It is a very mysterious and unknown language. There are many questions whether it was logosyllabic, pictographic, its root in Dravidian or Sanskrit, and so on. So we are hopeful that today in this deliberation we'll be able to have some answer to these questions, and our efforts will be rewarded if this discussion forum opens up a dimension to the existing knowledge on the language during Harappan era. Thank you once again. Have a pleasant listening. So now I'd like to hand over the agenda virtually to respected principal, sir, to conduct the future course of action. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gitarto Goswami, one of the organizers of this international webinar. I offer my heartiest and warmest welcome to all who have participated, who are in this international webinar from different parts of the world. My warmest welcome to Ms. Bahata Ansubali Mukhopadhyay, the resource person of this webinar, and also I also extend my warm welcome to Professor Dr. Rajiv Hendik, the head of the Department of History, Guwahati University, as well as the Dean of Faculty of Arts of that university, who is an old friend of mine, and Dr. Soumitra Pujari, Director of ICAC of this college, as well as all my colleagues, all the research scholars present, and my student friends. So we are very happy to inform you that the Jorhat College has decided to host a series of international webinars on the occasion of celebration of centenary of the excavation of Harappa in which took place in 1921, started in 1921, and that's why we are celebrating its centenary in this year, 2021. But the excavation of Mohenjo-daro started in 1922. So our webinar series would continue into 2022 to jointly remember both these occasions. So in our series of webinars, we have already held one day before yesterday, which was addressed by Professor Asfaq Hussain of the Department of History of University of Dhaka. And this time, and this series of webinars are expected to address the questions of state and political structure in the whole Indus Valley civilization, which spread across the subcontinent, from Kolar in Karnataka, throughout Gujarat and Rajasthan and Haryana and Punjab, and also parts of Kashmir and Uttar Pradesh, through different parts of Pakistan, including Balochistan, to different parts of Afghanistan, and the influence of which extended up to Mesopotamia. So 1,500 cities or sites have been found associated with that civilization, one of which site is excavated as near as Bangladesh, as reported by Professor Hussain day before yesterday. So whether these cities were ruled by a centralized state or it was a federal structure, that we are discussing in this series of webinar. And one of the most fascinating subject or topic of this series is today's one, that is about the language of Harappa. Though Ms. Bahata Ansubali Mukhopadhyay will primarily shed light on taking the key or cue from one word, that is Pilu, that is the Pilu word, but we would also like to shed light on the broader question of the whole language, whether it was a Dravidian or Austric or any other, that we would also talk upon after a few minutes. But now let me invite Dr. Rajiv Hendik, as I have already informed you. He's the head of the Department of History, Guwahati University, to inaugurate this webinar formally. Professor Rajiv Hendik, a very old friend. Professor Hendik? Are you not here, Professor Hendik? Are you listening? Gitartho, can you see him?
Yes, sir, he was there.
I also saw him. He was here,
Yes, sir.
but
Yeah, so maybe some technical problems, sir.
yeah, we hope that Professor Hendik would be around very soon.
Yes, yeah.
President, please.
Rajiv, sir, I think you are muted.
Yeah. I'm terribly sorry for, I'm in a very bad situation actually. I shouldn't say, actually in a hospital, in a room actually. I just tried to make this because, the entire college of Jorhat College is very special for me. And I congratulate them for organizing this centenary celebration of Harappan excavation. So respected principal, Devagota Sharma sir, the very special speaker for today's talk webinar, Ms. Bahata Angsumali Mukhopadhyay. I have read your work and I congratulate Jorhat College for having been able to rope her in actually. It's great to, it will be great to hear you speak of Pilu, though your work I think is known to quite a lot. And it is also a very, I think this must be very unique. I haven't heard anybody doing a centenary celebration of the Harappan excavation. And it has been very intelligently done by Jorhat College, and I congratulate them for that. There has been too much of webinars going all around for Azadi Ki Amrit Mahotsav, but this too is so important for all of us because after all, Indus Valley is a starting point of our civilization. So, Mitro, you have to mute yourself. Anyway, so, and linguistics have become so important for us. And I think Pilu, the word, the way we connect it with elephant is very important. And the linguistics can help history in the reconstruction of history. And that is what we can all look for actually, what linguistics have to offer to history. Because we all have been saying that history has taken a linguistic turn. Now this linguistic turn is something that we will today know from Mukhopadhyay's talk. At the same time, being a person who is, I do environmental history, it makes me wonder what happened to the elephants of the Indus Valley. That again is something, if really the ecology of Indus Valley supported a habitat which had elephants, because we know today it is an arid zone. It is an arid zone. And we know about the theory of desiccation, which has been widely accepted by many, that there was, of course, it has been at the same time, Professor Irfan Habib has actually not accepted that. He says that the drains of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the city drains which are there, they are actually just sufficient to carry the precipitation, the rainfall that may occur even today. So you know, there are very interesting debates on the ecology of Indus Valley, how it was, what it became, did it really become dry? There was this desiccationist debate. But then we also talk as environmental historians, we also talk about the different seals which are there, which shows different animals apart from the elephant. And it appeared to us that, you know, it might have been that at least the people of Indus Valley, they had some encounter with these animals. They must have seen these animals roaming around their, their place or nearby. So therefore, Indus Valley really is a very, very exciting area. And today we have, I think, the best person one can have to talk about Pidu, that is Ms. Bahata Anshubali Mukhopadhyay, the Indus Valley's elephant ward, its voyage to Mesopotamia and its Dravidian root. Because we it's really wonderful to inaugurate this international webinar on such a very interesting topic. With these words, I would like to inaugurate the seminar, and I would like to once again thank the organizers and congratulate them for having this series of talks on the Harappan civilization.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Rajiv Hendik, the Honorable Head of the Department of History, Guwahati University, as well as Dean, Faculty of Arts of that university. I have been fortunate enough to enjoy the friendship of Professor Hendik for nearly 3 decades now. And with your thought-provoking words, you have already shed light on the topic. Thank you very much, Professor Hendik. I now request
The sounds are not clear.
offer the welcome address. Professor Vora of the Department of English College will offer the welcome address.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all the distinguished guests, principal and faculty members of Jorhat College, coordinator of the webinar, director ICAC, and participants from various educational institutions and other forums taking part in this series of international webinar on Harappan civilization. Jorhat College prides itself in observing the milestones of historical events and makes an effort to remember and preserve the relevance and social legacy of it so that the present generation and the coming ones are able to reacquaint themselves with these great world events. We have read about Harappa Mohenjo-daro civilization in our history books, and the excavation in various sites have highlighted the different aspects and areas of functioning of this great civilization. We have heard about it in the speeches of the coordinator and the chairperson of this webinar today, and also of our principal, sir. The inaugural speech by Dr. Rajiv Handik, HOD, Department of History, Gauhati University, also enlightened us on this topic, and we learnt many unknown facts. I would thus like to refrain myself from speaking anything more on this subject. We have people of eminence and authority to provide valuable information on this topic. The keynote address will be given by our principal, sir, Dr. Debobroto Horma. The main attraction of today's webinar is the much awaited speech by our resource person, Bahata Ansumali Mukhopadhyay, who will deliver a lecture on Pilu, Indus Valley's elephant word, its voyage to Mesopotamia, and its Dravidian route. I welcome you, ma'am, to this important webinar. We are sure to benefit from your research and expertise on this subject. I would also like to welcome Dr. Rajiv Handik, the inaugurator of this webinar, principal and faculty members of Jorhat College, coordinator of this webinar, director ICAG, faculty members of various colleges, participants from other organizations, former colleagues, office staff, and student participants to this webinar. Welcome everyone, and hope all of you have a great evening. Thank you.
Ms. Manisha Dora, for your warm welcome address. And now it is my task to deliver the keynote address. First of all, I would like to say that when I was informed about the topic chosen by the resource person, that its voyage to Mesopotamia and its Dravidian route, it was, I was enthralled, and it was very fascinating topic to begin with. And immediately afterwards, something struck me. As a student of language, as a compiler of Assamese National Dictionary, immediately it struck me that I have heard this word also in Assam. I wondered where I heard this word, how it seemed to be so familiar to me. And I also appealed to my friends through the social media to know in which places or which districts of Assam there are pilkhanas. So my friends informed that there are pilkhanas where elephants are kept. In the district of Sibsagar, there is a Hatighuli, which is also known as the pilkhana. In Kaziranga, there is a pilkhana. In Tezpur, there is a Hati pilkhana. Hati pilkhana, which means it is a double validation of the same word pilkhana or pilukhana. Then in Laluk of Lakhimpur district, there is another pilkhana, which also precisely means the same thing. So it was very wonderful, not only from Harappa to Mesopotamia or backwards to the Dravid hinterlands of South India, but also throughout the Jharkhand of Central India up to Assam. Pilu or Pil, it means elephant. So this might be a key which may open up the enigmatic Harappan language. So to begin with, I would just mention few names which must be very familiar to scholars of your height. But still, for my students, as my students are also here, my colleagues are also here, I would like to recall that Professor Walter A. Fairservice Jr., he was pointed enough when he said that the language of Harappa could be most possibly Munda or rather Paramunda. Secondly, he named that it also had some influence of Dravid. Asko Parpola was specific that the language of Harappa was Dravidian, but then Dravidian also had many branches. Dravidian is a very broad term. It is a term of a family of languages. It spreads from the southernmost tip of, not just the southernmost tip of India, but it spreads from northeast Sri Lanka throughout the south of India to not only Harappa, but beyond that, throughout Pakistan of the Baluchistan region, then Afghanistan and beyond. But it doesn't go only northward, it also spreads eastward. It is spoken, some branches of the Dravidian languages like Kurukh and Malto. Kurukh, one particular branch of Kurukh, the Dhangar branch, it is spoken in Nepal. Then Kurukh is spoken by all the Urao Adivasis of not only Jharkhand, but also in Assam Tea Gardens and Assam ex-Tea Garden settlements, where Adivasis of Urao origin, they live and speak that language, Kurukh language even now. So Asko Parpola, when he was speaking that it was Dravidian, then it was the northern branch of Dravidian, and this Brahui, both the Brahui and the Kurukh are parts of they belong to the northern branch. And he has given many proofs to prove that the Harappan language could be nearer to the northern Dravidian branch than the southern Dravidian. Then there is Jonathan M. Kenoyer, who said that there might have been multiple languages. Jonathan Mark Kenoyer said that the Indus script was over to express a multitude of languages, hundreds of languages are expressed through the Roman script. The Harappan script might have been used by many languages. It is not impossible. Then he said the disappearance of the Indus script can be associated with the transformation and decline of the Indus urban centers. Then we have Michael Widgell, Bhaskar Nandi, the eminent scholar, first mentioned Michael Widgell to me when he said that Michael Widgell was the head of the Department of Sanskrit in Harvard. He also first enlightened me, saying that it was Michael Widgell who said the substratum of Sanskrit is found to be Marathi. So here also Michael Widgell of Harvard, he said, he is very specific when he says that of the Indus script must start with circa 300 para-Austro-Asiatic loanwords in the Rig Veda, comparing other Munda and Austro. So he put Mundari as the possible biggest source for Harappan languages. And then he also mentioned the Dravidian. The decipherment has been tried for the past 35 years or so, mainly on the basis of Dravidian, but he laid stress on the Mundari rather. Then there was, of course, our very own Iravatham Mahadevan, who said it was basically Dravidian with sprinklings of Mundari and maybe Tibeto-Burman, Mongolian, other languages also, or there might be some other unspecified unknown languages. This is for the scholarly perspective, scholarly aspect of the language issue, but there are other aspects as well. Being an activist, I would like to, in my keynote address, I would also like to shed light on some other hitherto unknown, hitherto undiscussed aspects of the language question. Theodore Kisku Rapaz, he was a great Santhal scholar. He was almost a non-Azerian when he died, and I used to visit him, and he used to visit my place also, and he was very definite that the language of Harappa had something to do with the language of Santhals. That is again Mundari. This is again Paramunda or Proto-Mundari. And he cited many examples of the affinity of Santhali language with whatever is found in Harappan languages. Then he mentioned, during his lifetime, he had mentioned a book by, he said it was in a manuscript form, never published, because one of the authors, N.K. Barma, who was a district magistrate in the district of Santhal Pargana, who had died immediately after authoring the book. But to my surprise, very lately, I discovered the book Echoes of Indus Valley by Arun Pathak and N.K. Barma, in which there are hundreds of proofs given to prove that the Santhals of Santhal Pargana and Jharkhand and around Hazaribagh, where Bulu Imam discovered many caves engraved with the writings which are very similar to those of Harappan scripts. And Arun Pathak and N.K. Verma, they, along with Santhal scholars, Santhal priests, they visited the caves and they found that whatever is now worshipped very secretly by the Santhal priests are actually Harappan words. Harappan scripts are used to write their language. So they have provided many proofs, many linguistic proofs, many scientific. I have the book with me right now, and I would conclude my keynote address by saying that not just that, there is another very active Gaur, G-O-N-D Gaur personality, a lexicographer as well a grammarian from the Gaur community in Maharashtra. He was Motiram Kangale originally. His name given by his parents was Motiram Kangale, but later he refused to be known as Motiram. He changed his name to Motiraban Kangale. He was a great lexicographer who published the first ever dictionaries of Gondi language, through which he proved and claimed, he claimed very firmly that the language of Harappa was a Gondi language or the language of Gondwana. So whether we have to remember that Gondi language or the language of the Gaur was also a Dravidian language. So last but not the least, I will give you one more very interesting fodder to ponder over. So when few months back, I was making a live presentation in the Facebook about the language of Harappa. Isa Khalkho Urao. Who is an MA from Cotton University. She contacted me and she said that since her childhood she has been in Nagaon district, and in her childhood when she was as young as 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years, she used to tell her repeatedly evening after evening stories of Harappa. And not only the stories of Harappa, very nostalgic memories about Harappa, and saying and requesting her and urging her, when you grow old, sometime take me to the bank of the Indus, because that was our original place. Not only that, she would etymologically explain the word Harappa in Kuduk language. So it was a very amazing thing, and we are unfortunate that Kanni Khalkho Urao is no more, but whatever she told to her educated granddaughter, it is now recorded. It is now recorded, and we do believe that there could be many more clues to the language of Harappa. Not just the scholarly clue, but the unscholarly, uneducated, illiterate clue there might be. So as Ms. Bahata Angsumali Mukhopadhyay would be shedding light on the language of Harappa with the key word Pilu, and which is even now popularly known in all parts of Assam, Pilu. So it is very interesting. I do believe that this evening would be a very amazing, very interesting one. And I now request Subhrajyoti Sanda of the Department of English to introduce our resource person formally.
Thank you, sir. Our resource person for today's webinar, Ms. Bahata Anshubali Mukhopadhyay, is a software technologist and an independent researcher. Originally hailing from Bengal, she currently resides in Bengaluru. Her research area includes structural and semantic aspects of the scripts and inscriptions from Indus Valley civilization. She has also researched on the linguistic identities of the Indus Valley people. She has published a number of research papers in national and international journals. Her paper interrogating Indus inscriptions to unravel their mechanism of meaning conveyance, problematizes the existing efforts of decipherment, and argues that the Indus Valley scripts are in logographic signs, and so attempts at reading them as phonological units are essentially flawed. Another research paper by her, titled Ancestral Dravidian Languages in Indus Civilization, published in the Nature Group Journal, Humanities and Social Sciences, Communication, seeks to resolve partly one of the most debated questions of South Asian prehistory, that is, the linguistic identity of the Indus Valley people. Her latest research paper, which is under peer review, claims to have decoded certain signs of the Indus scripts. Apart from being a researcher, Mukhopadhyay is a prolific writer of poems in Bengali. Her latest collection came out in the 44th International Kolkata Book Fair in 2020. Thank you. Over to Principal, sir.
Thank you very much, Subrajyoti Chanda, for introducing our respected resource person to our august audience. I now request Ms. Bahata Angsumali Mukhopadhyay to deliver her presentation.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity to talk about my research on Harappan languages. So am I audible? And first, let me check if my content is shown
It's
properly. Okay.
It's okay.
It's audible. Clear.
Thank you. Okay. So can you see my presentation now, sir?
Yes,
Yeah.
visible.
Nice. So thank you so much. So today's talk is titled Pilu, IVC's Elephant Word, its voyage to Mesopotamia and its Dravidian route. So the keynote address was wonderful. Before really talking on slide by slide, I will like to clarify a few points that as Professor Sharma rightly said, Dravidian languages encompass a great number of languages, and so my claim is more that ancestral Dravidian languages, their ancestral forms were spoken by a significant population of IVC possibly, and also that an interesting point is this Pilkhana, this word was possibly introduced in India by the Islamic rulers of Sultan and Mughal empires. And so this is actually a reborrowing of the original Pil word. So as my paper has argued, from India, this word traveled to ancient Near East through Persia, and then it got preserved there, whereas in India, other Indo-Aryan words later were more prevalent in the northern part, and other South India, some other elephant words took prevalence. So then this word was actually repopularized by that Islamic rule in India. So that is the Pilkhana we see now, and Assam being a very important place of elephants, it will obviously have many Pilkhanas there. So the keynote address and all the discussion was wonderful. I learned a lot from them. So let me start my humble presentation now. So traveling in a time machine, if we meet an Indus Valley trader today, can we say any word that he or she will recognize? Possibly, yes. So this paper this talk is based on this particular paper of mine, as already discussed. I won't talk much about this now. Let's move on to the more interesting topic. So can we communicate with the Harappans in some way? And if you really could, go to Indus Valley of 2000 BC and make a, say, hand gesture like an elephant's trunk and say the word Pilu a few times, possibly many Harappans will understand us. And that's a fun fact. So again, if we say make a hand gesture like brushing teeth and say the word Pilu, many of the Harappans will possibly understand us again, and they will take it this time as a name of a tree, which was used as toothbrush by them. And in ancient time in the northwestern Indo-Pakistani subcontinent. So they will possibly give us a toothbrush if we say Pilu in that context. Toothbrush made of that Pilu tree's branches or roots. So will this particular word Pilu help us in ancient Near East as well? Yes, just change Pilu to Piru, like the R to La, because ancient Persians didn't have this phoneme L mostly. So not Persians, ancient Iranian speaking peoples. Old Persian language came a lot later. So they changed all the foreign words L's to R's. Like Babylon became Babiru, from where we again took the word Babheru in Babheru Jataka. So if we say the word Pirus, possibly the traders of Mesopotamia, Elamite traders and Hurrian traders of 2000 BC will understand us, and they will take us as ivory merchants coming from Persian Gulf or Meluha. So what are the main takeaways from this talk? So there are some controversial claims. Is anybody not muted? I think there's a noise. So there is a controversial claim that the language was ancestral Dravidian language in Indus Valley. Many of the population people spoke that, but there are some more straightforward takeaways. One is an Indus zoonym or elephant animal name, that is an elephant word. So we claim that the people of IBC use the word Pilu to signify elephants, that is tuskers, and that this word traveled to ancient Near East through IBC's ivory trade. So there are many important scholarly speculations about Harappan words already. For example, Parpola himself have talked about Mesopotamian texts referring to the Magilam boats of Meluha, which he compared to Mangini, that is sheep or boat, and Manga, that forepart of a sheep or mast. And he said that this possibly originated from Proto-Dravidian manchi or monkey, meaning sheep. So this time, the difference is that we have found a Harappan word which is backed up by huge archaeological, historical, and linguistic evidence. Am I audible? There is possibly some sound from the philosophy department. Somebody has not muted, possibly.
Yeah, I asked him to mute it. Okay, ma'am. Yeah, please continue, ma'am.
The main takeaways are also an Indus phytonym, that is a toothbrush tree. So we claim that Harappans call the trees of the Salvadora Persica or SPP as Pilu. These trees are called meswak, that is tooth cleaning stick in the Arabic speaking countries, and toothbrush tree in the English speaking world. So their twigs and roots have been used as toothbrush since time immemorial. So this is the first study that possibly could etymologically explain the most popular Indian name of this important tree. And then the Harappa's Proto-Dravidian tooth word. So if people across IBC call their tuskers, that is elephants, and toothbrush trees as Pilu, then what is a common connection between tuskers and toothbrushes? Obviously tooth. So across the world, elephants are mostly named either by tusk or trunk. For example, in Egypt, there are Abu-based elephant words which are related to Egyptian tooth word, that is Abahi and Abe. In Sanskrit also we know Danti, Radha, Dviradha, etc. are tusk-based elephant words, and Kari, Hasti, etc. trunk-based. So across the world, miswak trees and toothbrush trees are also mainly named after their toothbrush-related use. So quite obviously, this common cognate word for them both has this tooth-based coinage, and then the Indus Valley tooth word must be related to Pilu. Interestingly, Pilu is related to the Proto-Dravidian tooth word pal and its phonological variations. That is, in Malto, it is called pal, not pal. And in Parji, where all the a's are a's normally, it is called pil, etc. So Pilu or Pilluvam, Piluru, etc. are also Dravidian elephant words. Now, some people raise objection regarding the A to I variation in Pal and Pil, that the Proto-Dravidian word is Pal. How come Pil is derived from it? Now, phonological variations are found in many present and ancient Dravidian words. For example, the Indo-Aryan name of the jackfruit tree are Kantakifala or Kantahala or Kathal. That is because the fruit's toothy or thorny skin. That was the main nomenclature feature here. Now, similarly, the Dravidian names of jackfruit trees are Panas, Palavu, Pala, Pilavu, Pila, Pela, etc., which are connected to the same Proto-Dravidian tooth word, Pal, according to grammarian Kittel. And and its phonological variation, pil and pil. So taking out the derivational suffixes that in pal or pilavu, this a and avu, etc., there are suffixes. So if we take them out, we then get these alternative root words for tooth, that is both pal and pil. So I'll give some more examples later. So this kind of phonological variation is easily explainable in Dravidian tradition, linguistic tradition, and also there are some other morphophonemics related explanation that will be produced later. So then the credibility of Harappa's Proto-Dravidian tooth word as a witness of its language. So even if the Pilu-based Harappan tooth word was related to Proto-Dravidian tooth word Pal, can a single word help us determine IVC's linguistic ancestry? The answer is astonishingly yes, because if it is a part of core ultra concept vocabulary, and if there is an ecosystem of related meanings and words around it. So the significance of basic vocabulary, what is basic or core vocabulary, and how is it important to determine a language's ancestry? So large portion of nouns or language of a language are actually borrowed from other languages. We know that, right? So we all say computer, but that doesn't mean we are English speakers. But so just any noun cannot be used to identify a language's genealogy and ancestry, because that can be a borrowed word very well. So in this situation, linguist Maurice Swadesh's world famous concept of basic or core vocabulary comes to our rescue. So Swadesh has gleaned out 100 vocabulary items of most of the speech communities, which will not change for thousands of years. So that is called core vocabulary. So there is a part of our vocabulary which is cultural part of our vocabulary. That is, they involve the semantic or meaning fields of religion, clothing, house, social and political relations, etc. And they show high percentages of borrowing from other languages. But in contrast, certain culture-free domains, meaning domains are there, like the semantic fields of sense perception and spatial relation, like here, there kind of things, and body parts, kinship terms. So they are quite resistant to borrowing. They are the core vocabulary, and because they are not borrowed, they continue from the parent language to the child language for thousands of years with a great, replicability. So core vocabulary items are ultra concept. They're typically linked to stability, universality, simplicity, and resistance to borrowing in historical and comparative linguistics. Across the world, hundreds of linguists are currently working on establishing different languages' ancestry and temporal relationship with their siblings using these core vocabulary concepts. It's a very interesting infographics presented here. So based on evolutionary biologist Mark Pagel's research, so Mark Pagel took Maurice Swadesh's original 200-word list of core vocabulary, and he computationally analyzed it against various language families, cognate words, etc. And he found that some of the words will actually stay almost intact with their sound values for 10,000 years in a language. For example, the word for eye or 2, 3, 5, etc. Who. So interestingly, if you find that a language uses tu or dwa or dui, right, in as number 2, and if it uses tree or try or dray, etc. as 3, then most possibly that is an Indo-European language. So only from a few words, an inference can be made at least, or it is highly influenced by an Indo-European tongue at least. So similarly, when we come to, when we come here, so the significance of tooth is a body part item. So it is a core vocabulary item, quite high here. So here tooth is shown somewhere here. So in that infographic, so that is part of an ultra conserved vocabulary. And if people of IVC use a Pilu-based Proto-Dravidian tooth word, then the corollary is a significant population of IVC possibly spoke some ancestral Dravidian languages, and this Dravidian hypothesis supports plethora of ethnohistorical and archaeogenetic evidence, as will be displayed in this talk. So Pilu is not a single word also, it's more of an ecosystem of meaning. So before going into details of archaeological evidence and all, I'll present the ground for the whole hypothesis, that when we explain this Pilu word, it also explains a few more unexplained etymology. For example, the Pilu is now we are saying we are proposing that it is the elephant word, also the toothbrush tree word, and that is linked to the tooth-based coinage. Now there is another tree, Caria arborea, in Ayurveda and many other Sanskrit botanical texts. Pilu is mentioned, and in their interpretation, scholars are confused. They say Pilu, that is Caria arborea or Salvadora spp. So why Caria arborea shares this phytonym is very interesting. I propose that actually, if you see modern scientific literature, Caria arborea is one of the most favorite fruits eaten by elephants. I think top 3 to 4 fruits they come into that actually, and that particular tree is having big fruits, so they depend a lot on elephants for their seed dispersal. So if elephants are reduced, the trees also get really affected. So that is the strong ecosystem correlation. So that's just like another tree, Dillenia indica, which is called elephant apple tree, because elephants eat that fruit so much. This Caria arborea tree also possibly called Pilu, because this elephant as elephant's favorite fruit. Interestingly, palm trees are called Pilu in Sanskrit, and famous Bengali lexicographer Haricharan Bandyopadhyay has explained that palm trees have trunks that resemble elephant legs, so they are called Pilu. So you see how this same word is distributed in various contexts. That means how ancient it was, that it got distributed in so many contexts. Very interestingly, in Sanskrit, there is a word called Pilla that means blear-eyed or moist-eyed, but there is no Sanskrit root actually that is related to either eye or moisture or water, that is pill-based. Okay, so from where this word Pilla came? So I claim that since elephants have distinct feature of teary eyes, they have a particular gland issue. I may say that they don't have the physiological mechanism of removing excess tears. So their tears are not emotionally connected to their brain, but they're mostly to moisture their eyes, and they keep on flowing actually. So kind of teary, moist eyes always are seen in elephants. Possibly this word Pilla, that is blear-eyed or moist-eyed, originated from this Pilu-based elephant word again. And from there possibly another word Pillaka, that is in Sanskrit means Hastini or female elephant, originated. Then there is this Dravidian word Pillayar for elephant page god Ganesha. Now in this Pillayar in Tamil, Pillari in Telugu, and there is a common belief as of now that since Pilla also means child in Dravidian, and normally people think that Pillayar means noble child. So actually Pillayar, according to other linguists, are actually related to pill-based words, elephant and tooth word, because in Sinhalese, which is another Indo-Aryan language, but very much connected to Dravidian tradition in Sri Lanka. So their Pullayar means Ganesha, the elephant lord of forest, not noble child. And generally Ganesha's names like Hastimukha, elephant face, Dantin, having task, Ekadanta, Bakratunda, etc. They're all related to the god's elephant-like physical characteristic. Actually, Ganesha is mostly possibly the one of the very few Hindu gods who have a elephant-like feature imagined. So it's very interesting. Why should it be called like noble child rather than elephant-based name? So that is the linguistic thinking of many scholars. That is also linked to the same word. Then there is a word called Pilusara. So Huen Sang, 7th century travelogue, revealed that the ancient city Kapisha of Indus Valley had a toponym, place name Pilusara for a mountain. This mountain was translated Siang Kien in Chinese, where Siang means elephant. Now, the local legend says that the mountain was a spirit, okay, local god who takes the form of an elephant, because the mountain was also elephant shaped. From there, the name came. So in Afghanistan, Kapisha, there is a small mountain which is also named after this elephant deity, and that is called Pilusar. So that's a very important key evidence. So let's discuss so this is a ground. So that now we know that we are not really talking about a single word, and that word is also a very important word as being part of core vocabulary of a speech community. And there are a lot of archaeological evidence that we'll now discuss. So before that, we will just have a terminology explained. So what is a proto-word? So proto-word is reconstructed ancient form of a word of a language group, which often remains in use as a cognate word, like similar sound, similar meaning, that is called cognate, in most of the child language of a reconstructed proto-language, like ancient parent language. So so before going to the archaeological evidence, let's see what is the complexity around exploring Harappan languages. So the Indus inscriptions, the IVC's only written documents, despite several claimed decipherment efforts, are till date mostly undeciphered. So from them, we have very less privilege to understand about Harappan language. Now, the vast region encompassed by Indus IVC, that is more than 1 million square kilometer, has a variety of different language groups spoken even today. So as of now, Indo-Aryan language like Punjabi, Seraiki Lahanda, Punjabi dialects, Sindhi in Sindh, Hindi, Marwari, Gujarati, etc. in eastern parts of Greater Indus Valley. Dardic languages, Shina, Khowar, Kohistani in the Kashmir and that kind of part. Iranian languages, Baluchi, Dari, Pashto, Wakhi, etc. in Greater Indus Valley, western parts. Nuristani in northeastern Afghanistan. Dravidian language, Brahui, the isolated language, which is very important as a evidence of this Dravidian, thing of Indus Valley, but that has a lot of controversy also. We can discuss it later. That is also spoken in Balochistan and Sindh. Burushaski is a language isolate that is spoken in northernmost Pakistan, etc. So ancient world was generally much more multilinguistic. So 12,000 to 20,000 languages have existed before the spread of agriculture, compared to now 7,000 languages. Now we have a lot of global communication, and also I think linguistic convergence is happening much more faster. So we have less languages now. So that means at an era of IVC, possibly we will have more languages than today. So further complexity, languages often migrate from their origin, mostly through migration of the speakers. And there are several unresolved questions around the prehistoric spatio-temporal expansion linguistic groups of present India, like Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Austroasiatic, Sino-Tibetan, in which parts they were spoken at which point of time. That's quite controversial, and their influences are over one another as well. So Dravidian group languages, as in the keynote address it was mentioned, despite being spoken mostly in southern India like Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, etc., also have scattered representations in India's northwestern part like Brahui, northeastern, that is Kuruk, Smalto, and central, that is Kolami, Naiki, Padri, Ollari, Gadava, etc. So that indicates that Dravidian speakers possibly had much greater prehistoric presence in northern India. We know that, like Suniti Kumar Chatterjee has told that Bengali has a lot of Dravidian influence, and actually while working I also feel amazed by seeing what kind of influence in these languages had. So similarly, Austroasiatic languages like Mundari, Santali, Khasi, which are currently spoken mostly in northeastern India, there is an isolated Austroasiatic language, Korku, amidst the Dravidian speaking Gondis and other Indo-Aryan speakers in Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, indicating the possibility that Austroasiatic also had a different expanse before. Then Indo-Aryan languages, which has provided with us with the most ancient texts like Vedic texts, whether they entered India from outside after IVC's decline or were present in India since or from before IVC era, and whether they were spoken in IVC or not, are also questions that have enjoyed almost 200 years of scholarly attention and too many, amateurish attempts as well, right? So there is archaeogenetics as an emerging field, and it can have immense influence in reconstructing IVC's linguistic prehistory as well. So in India, we see a great correlation between genetics and language. So North Indians primarily speak Indo-Aryan languages today and have relatively high proportions of West Eurasian related ancestry. South Indians primarily speak Dravidian languages and have relatively low proportions of West Eurasian ancestry. Austroasiatic Munda speakers who are concentrated in the central and eastern parts have East Asian paternal ancestry, not the maternal side, like Y haplogroup O2A in high percentages. Tibeto-Burman speakers in northeastern India coincide with high proportion of immigrant East Asian Y chromosome O3 type. So that means if we can guess linguistic ancestry to some extent, maybe from genetic ancestry, but we may not be quite sure always. So the answer is yes or no, whether archaeogenetic can directly resolve the linguistic questions, because genetics and languages are often correlated, but not always. So we know that in recent archaeogenetic studies, we have found that Iranian farmer-related ancestry and ancient ancestral South Indian-related ancestry, those are the terminologies, they are the characteristic genetic feature of many IVC people. So this is a paper where possibly more than 100 scientists had collaborated, Narasimhan et al. 2019, and it says that after IVC's decline, that is around 1800 BC, this population in different time range mixed with northwestern groups having more steppe ancestry and to form ancestral North Indians, and also mixed with the southern and eastern groups to form this ancestral South Indians, ASI. And ASI's direct descendants today live in tribal groups of South India. So there are South Indian Dravidian speakers who inherit the most from this ASI genetic lineage, like Palliar, Yanidi, etc. There's a huge correlation, genetic correlation is there, and the scientists say that it is natural to infer that because origin of ASI ancestry and ancestral Dravidian language are conquering some way. So problem is ASI itself was a mixed population. It's true that the people ASI are having some, Indus Valley people are having some ancestral South, contributing a lot to the ancestral South Indian ancestry, but ASI itself is mixed. So 25% of it was Iranian farm-related ancestry. So that part given, and other part is from ancient indigenous South Asians, like Andamanese hunter-gatherer and related ancestry. So the problem is, though there is a clear genetic link between IVC and ASI, we have a question that whose language won? Because if from IVC people are migrating from northwest to east and south, whether father tongue is winning or mother tongue is winning, that genetics cannot answer. Because in many cases, when there is a language change in already populated region, there is a strong correlation of the language change with immigrant Y chromosomes. That is called a patrilingual dispersion of father tongue, like Indian Austroasiatic language and Iceland's Scandinavian languages. So this father tongue is hypothesis is actually proposed and explained by Professor George Van Dream. So he said that the father tongue is actually getting taught by mothers to the children. That is why it slowly becomes mother tongue. So very interesting hypothesis. So this is why when this happens is when there is a large number of male immigrants who are settling in a place and they can influence the places, culture, socially, politically, and economically. So in case of population migration, though father tongue has shown a lot of influence when there is an invasion or migration, but there is a different kind of scenario sometimes. Like Eskimo speakers in Greenland and its Tibetic language speaking Balti in Pakistan, their mother tongue has prevailed, even though father tongue was there in culture. The father's other influence, like the Balti people, their culture was more the culture of the migrants, but the language remained the mother tongue. So even if genetic data proves that there is a north to south migration of the contributors of ASI ancestry, it cannot directly establish whose language has prevailed. So that is the kind of complexity we have. But there are very interesting ethno-historical, background to this. Aitareya Brahmana tells us a very intriguing story where sage Vishwamitra tried to give a descendant of Angira's clan a high place among his own descendants. So among his existing 101 sons, the elder 50 sons refused to lose their precedence, and thus they got cursed by Vishwamitra to live to the other end of the land as people of lower social strata. So this story is arguably alluding to disputes between different ancient tribes of India, and by the reference to elder 50 sons, possibly the more ancient indigenous tribes were meant. Among these elder 50 sons, Shabara, Pundra, Pulinda, Mutiba, and Andhra are mentioned. Pulinda is also many a times correlated with Andhra and this Odisha border. In Odisha, possibly Pulinda people once ruled, and some of these names really correspond to South Indian tribes, especially Andhra. So Krishnamurti has explained how Andhra corresponds to the Dravidian-speaking tribe whose language Andhra, that is pre-Telugu, was attested along with Dramila, that is pre-Tamil, as Bhasha, opposed to Sanskrit and Prakrit in Bharata's Natya Shastra. And Telugu, we know, is the official language of Andhra Pradesh today. So this is a quick glimpse of the distribution of some of the Indo-Aryan languages and Dravidian languages in India. So actually these terms, Aryan and Dravidian, are here strictly they're applied in the linguistic way, not in any other way. So some languages, depending on their particular characteristics, are called Dravidian, not otherwise. So the basic methodology of this study. So in this complex situation, our way of knowing in the value words are to find some proto words which meet most of the criteria, like following criteria, like archaeological evidence and historical evidence and linguistic evidence should indicate that the proto words had originated in IVC and the objects signified those proto words were prevalently produced and used in IVC. So those proto words etymology should be traceable to one of the language groups present in the Indian subcontinent, using the most stringent criteria of historical linguistics. For example, when we say some word in Dravidian word is Proto-Dravidian, then that word should have ideally cognate across North Central and South Dravidian languages, at least in North Central and South Dravidian. Because those languages, some families were actually, not in contact for more than a millennia. So any word that is common there has to be a proto-word, Proto-Dravidian word. So historical and linguistic evidence should also prove that the identified language group was present in Indian subcontinent in the IVC era. Archaeogenetic data should prove that the present speaker of that language group are significantly genetically related to the IVC population. And the proto-word should be etymologically related to the stable, non-borrowable basic vocabulary of a speech community. Now, for in IVC's elephant word Pilu, all these evidences match. So archaeological evidence shows that elephants were not indigenous to ancient Near East in middle 3rd to early 2nd millennium BC. And IVC was the sole supplier of Near East elephant ivory in this era. Historical evidence from Mesopotamian and Old Persian documents confirm the same. Linguistic evidence explains Pilu's etymology both as phytonym, that is tree name, and miswak tree, and zoonym for elephant, and indicates its Dravidian root. Archaeogenetic evidence confirms strong genetic connection between IVC population and present Dravidian speaking population. Mathematical linguistic studies confirms that Proto-Dravidian languages were present in IVC era, possibly much before that. And the etymological root of Pilu is tooth, which is part of the stable, non-borrowable basic vocabulary of a speech community. So how did I find about Pilu? So since IVC had a thriving trade relationship with Persian Gulf and Mesopotamia, I searched through ancient Near Eastern texts, hoping to find certain fossilized foreign words which had their origin in IVC. And the logic is that when we import a foreign commodity not locally produced or get to know about a completely foreign animal, we usually call it by its foreign name. For example, a kangaroo, which is indigenous to only Australia and New Guinea, is called a kangaroo in most of the unrelated language of the world as a foreign borrowed word. So let's see. So since we are not getting a written document in India, that is other than the small Indus inscriptions, which are undeciphered. So we have to first look at the ancient Near East, where there is a lot of written document. And interestingly, in ancient Near East documents, the elephant word is Pir or Piru or Piri. And they're very old, like in Akkadian wisdom tablet, which is of old Babylonian time. Their linguistic composition and all, analyzing that, scholars are saying that they belong to at least 2000 to 1000, Old Babylonian period, that is 2000 to 1600 BC, that they called elephant as Pir. There is a large Assyrian wisdom tablet where heated dialogue is there between an elephant and mosquito, like how small the mosquito is and all. Elephant is telling it. And there the elephant is mentioned as Piru as well. In Assyrian dictionary, the same time frame is confirmed for Piru. Piru also occurs in different versions of Gilgamesh epic, and it occurs in inscriptions of various Assyrian kings in their hunting expeditions and other trade-related documents. In the Old Persian Susha inscription of King Darius, this 550 BC, around 550 BC inscription, this word used for ivory is Pirush, whereas in its Elamite version, it is called Pihiraum. The he part of Pihiraum is to lengthen that I, that is a P, Dirgha E, right? That Pilu, that interestingly, that spelling is also tried to keep in Elamite. intriguingly, in the Hurrian part, that Hurrian people are people of Mitanni kingdom, and they had written various interesting letters, to Egyptian kings regarding, various things like to get their daughters married and to get some stones, lapis lazuli, back, and all various very interesting subjects are there. There in a letter also, ivory is mentioned as Sinni Beru. Beru here is a dialectal version of Piru, and that is the same Piru word. So why is it Piru? As I said, the word possibly went from IVC through Iranian traders to Mesopotamia, and Iranian tongue changed the L's to R's. So the very interesting thing is this Piru has, that is elephant word, has the same particular kangaroo scenario, that Akkadian language, Elamite, Hurrian, and Old Persian. Akkadian is Semitic group language, Elamite is a language isolate as of now. Hurrian language, the type is mostly undecided, and Old Persian is Iranian language. So these languages so different from each other. Why are they using the same cognate word if it is not a foreign word? That's a great indication. Now, ancient Mesopotamia had no indigenous elephants in that era, middle 3rd to early 2nd millennium BC. Actually, all the elephants in our world, they can be, classified between African and Asian elephants. And so in ancient Mesopotamia, there was one Syrian elephant of 1700 BC. They were there. But as archaeologists have confirmed, those are also provably Asian elephants who were imported from IVC, and Egypt's indigenous elephants were by that time exhausted. So IVC was the main, sole supplier of ivory. So that is why their ivory word got adopted in ancient Near East, where elephants didn't exist. So the concept of elephant and ivory didn't exist before they saw that end product of, finished ivory items, or sometimes ivory itself. And so normally Magan, Meluha, and Dilmun, these places are talked about in that ancient Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform sources as provenance of more than 42 traded commodities, including ivory. And in the 3rd dynasty text, there is a very Uruk text, there is this Gunmusen Meluha that is mentioned, that is ivory bird of Meluha. So Meluha is now very much established to be Indus Valley and Greater Indus area, and it is directly mentioning that the ivory birds are getting imported from there. No such bird is found till now in IVC, but interestingly, the Potts has excavated this ivory bird whose origin was from Asia or India. So that ivory bird he had excavated from Magan. So this is possibly this kind of ivory birds were exported from IVC to Mesopotamia. And interestingly, both this Magan and Meluha, right? So both these places, Magan and Dilmun, these places in their turn had their ivory coming from IVC itself. So many settlements of Oman Peninsula, that is Magan, and like the coastal settlements Umannar, Ras Al Had, Ras Al Jinj, etc., and the internal settlements as well, they had pronounced presence of IVC artifacts, industrial pottery, black sculptures, painted wares, etc., and cardinal beads, ivory combs, copper excess, signature IVC products in Ras Al Jinj. So this place actually, Ras Al Jinj, and this place, this is Lothal, this is Nageshwara. So from Gujarat, these ports, they used to directly go to these ports of Oman Peninsula and also to Bahrain later. So they have pronounced, a presence of Indus pottery, like 1/3 of the pottery is from IVC pottery. And here, in the very context of, context of bitumen, that is boat making, ship context, bitumen was used to insulate boats from water. So in that context, along with bitumen and, with Indus seal of typical so-called unicorn motif and Indus painted jar, this kind of Harappan combs are found, ivory combs with these dotted circles. These are typical Harappan designs. And when in Magan, there are some other things, designs, tulip designs and all also. But as Denis Frenez and others have proven, those designs are possibly made by itinerary ivory carvers going in those places. But the ivory was coming from IVC and the ivory carvers are also coming from IVC. And they were making the designs as per the local edit's choice. And also in Dilmun, that is Bahrain Island, that is having pronounced Indus presence. There, seal tradition, glyptic tradition is completely influenced by Indus Valley sealing tradition. There in a seal cutter's workshop, we have, along with signature ivory products, signature IVC products like carnelian nodules, unfinished beads, and worked shell specimens, we have this ivory. Asian elephant ivory. So there are many such archaeological evidence which shows that IVC was the sole source of ancient Near East ivory. Now in Iran there was no indigenous elephant either. So Iran did not not the exporter of ivory obviously to Mesopotamia. And actually in Iran, elephants were hated. Like they were thought of Ahriman's creature, like a demonic spirit. And in different Zoroastrian books, actually, like Pallavi, Rivayat, Bandhaisan, etc., in Middle Persian texts, the cultural hero of Iran, they are praised for not accepting elephants from the demons in exchange of their local cattle. So obviously, Iran was not the source of either ivory or the ivory word of ancient Near East. So the only possible source was IVC. Archaeological evidence shows that these are Indian elephants from whose ivory is used, not the African elephants. And then in stark contrast to this like absence of indigenous elephants in other areas, India was teeming with elephant. Archaeologically, the earliest evidence of Asian elephant tusk was found from Mehergarh, which is 5500 BC Mehergarh, which is a long-standing Indus settlement. Later, the ivory that is found in other places was also provably coming from Indus Valley as well. And in Mohenjo-daro, ivory was so common that bone took second place to it. Like ivory things were used in day-to-day, like small day-to-day items as well, like combs, coal sticks, pin, awl, for weaving, hooks, etc. So, and in whole ancient Near East, this majestic animal was never represented. The only representation, as Denis Frenez and other archaeologists are confirming, they are very much influenced by Indian, Indian tradition. So in India, as we know, in Ramayana, Mahabharata, other canonical Buddhist and Jain texts and other Sanskrit works, ivory carving, especially Arthashastra, ivory carving, ivory artifacts, ancient ivory markets, king's control on elephant forests, etc., are always discussed. So we have overwhelming historical, textual, and archaeological evidence that IVC was the main source of elephant ivory. So if IVC was the main source, and if that word is used in different unrelated languages, that Piru word, then we obviously should check whether that word has its Indian origin or not. So we find that in India, Pilu had signified elephant in Pali and Sanskrit, but it was not a Sanskrit word, as the Mimamsa scholar Kumaril Bhatta, ancient Mimamsa scholar of 7th century, he had specified that as tree, that is the toothbrush tree, it is part of Aryan speech, but as elephant, it is part of non-Aryan Mleccha languages. And it does not have any Austroasiatic or Munda etymology either. We have Kuiper's discussion around that and all that I don't have time to discuss now. So the words for this elephant, this Pilu, etc., there are similar words in Dravidian languages, that is Pilu in Tamil, Piluru in Telugu, and Kannada, it is Palla, Pallava, and Pilu. So the words are etymologically linked to the Pal or a Pel word, that is a tooth word in Dravidian languages. There are around 25 Dravidian languages, and across all Dravidian languages, Pal, Pallu, Palli, Padu, Palu, etc., Pel, etc., are the tooth words. And so they are reconstructed as a Proto-Dravidian word, as I said, because North, Central, and South Dravidian languages have those cognates. And as Kittel has explained in his Kannada dictionary, the etymology of the Kannada elephant word Palla, that is having this Pal, that is tooth etymology, Pallava also. And most intriguingly, in Tamil, Piliru means to roar as elephant. So we know that Tamil was a very conservative language where ancient words are very much preserved. So it will never be, influenced by any other language, like the later March 13th century reborrowing of the Pil that came as Pilkhana and all. So if Tamil has this word Piliru as roaring as elephant, even though South Indian language as of now have different popular elephant words like Enugu, Ana, etc., this Pil word has its vestiges remaining in Dravidian languages in various ways. Interestingly, from this very word, tooth word Palla, we have another animal naming, the hog, that is having another tasker. They are also called Pandri, which is coming from this particular word, Pal. So we have already discussed about the Miswak tree. So the Miswak tree's identification as Pilu is a very important thing for this research, because for elephant word, we are having that word in Mesopotamia and Persia. But in Persia, it is the ivory word, actually, not the elephant word, Pirush. But for Pilu, we have Indian evidence that Atharvaveda is mentioning Pilu as a tree on which fruits, doves have fed. And most of the phytonyms attested in Vedic texts like Ashwatha, Palasha, Tila, etc. have survived in India with minimal phonological changes. So similarly, Pilu has also survived. Across all the North Indian languages, actually, Pilu is the word for Salvadoras persica. Like in Baloch and other languages of Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc., also Plewan, Piluni, etc. are the words for Pilu, the Salvadora persica. And Mahabharata gives a very important testimony that Pilu trees had existed in Indus Valley. 2 to 3 times when Indus Valley is mentioned in Mahabharata, Pilu trees and Pilu forests are mentioned there. So that actually locationally correlates this word to this IVC region, because sometimes people question me that how do you know that elephants were not taken from South India to Indus Valley, and that is how the Pilu word traveled from there. So the very interesting answer is this Pilu word as a phytonym, which is etymologically explainable in the same line as the Pilu word as elephant. And Pilu word as phytonym was not so much prevalent in South India. This particular tree was called in other names, as in today's South India. But across Indus region, Pilu is the main name remaining for the word. And in both in Ayurveda and of Indian medicine and T.B. Unani of Perso-Arabic traditional medicine system, Pilu and Pilun are the words for this tree. As Chinese Buddhist pilgrim Sun Yun of 500 CE showed in his record that there is this old legend of Udyana, an ancient kingdom of Indus Valley. Buddha once purified his mouth and then planted a piece of his chewing stick, that is Dantakashta, in the ground. It immediately took root and is at present a great tree called Pilu or Polu. That is a tree, Pilu tree of Salvadora persica. So that means in that region, since time immemorial, this tree was getting used in toothbrush, and that particular tradition is recaptured and reiterated with Buddhist legend in Buddhist text. Now, paleobotanical studies carried out in Harappa shows that this tree was used by Harappans profusely. From the charcoal assemblage, we get to know that. And across, as I said, in Pakistan and Afghanistan, Balochi and Pashto, it is called Pilu in play one. So that shows the extent of the word in this whole, sorry. So now, many of the common names of Salvadora persica are etymologically analyzable. So this coinage cannot be accidental. For example, this tree is called Mithijar or Kharijar in Gujarat and Punjab, where Mithum, Mitha, and Khara, they all mean salt. So this tree is another name in English is called saltbush tree. So these names are either because that tree is a natural tree of saline soil, extreme saline soil, and its taste also is saline. So that is the reason this saltbush tree of English name corresponds to the other Indian name. Similarly, Kalarva is a name of this tree in Tamil, where Kalu and Kalar means saline soil in Sindh, again an Indus Valley place. That means again our Indus Valley region is getting related in a Tamil name, and this Kalar word, as Parpola has confirmed, is a Proto-Dravidian word which means saline soil. So this tree is called as the tree of the saline that grows in black saline soil. So thus, if all the other names of this tree are not accidental, the Pilu, that name can also not be accidental. That has to be a deliberate tooth-based coinage. And very interestingly, Telugu, Piluru means this Salvadora tree, that is toothbrush tree, elephant, and also it means to tear or cut. And that gives a very interesting glimpse in the morphophonemics, Dravidian morphophonemics of Pilu, as I will tell immediately. But the very interesting thing is, see, in Sanskrit, there is a immediate parallel. Radha means cutting or tearing, splitting. Radha means tooth, tusk, and Radhi and Virada also means elephant. So from these arguments, we can understand how these etymologies are completely related. So we have already discussed how tooth is a very important core vocabulary item, like Maurice Wadesh's basic vocabulary list has it. Leipzig Jakarta list of the least borrowable vocabulary, that also records tooth as a core item. ASJP list, the list of 40 most stable and effective vocabulary. These are lists, different stable vocabulary lists, proposed by renowned linguists and are used across the world in glottochronology, or language classification and language lineage discovering, etc. So Dolgopolsky's list is there with 23 stable vocabulary item. In all these lists, tooth is on a very high stature, as per its weightage in stability and all. Very interestingly, in Proto-Altaic languages, Proto-Chukchi Kamaskan language and Proto-Dravidian, Pal, Pala, and Val for tooth is the common cognate. That means not only in Indian languages, across Eurasia, across language families, this particular form of tooth word has prevailed. So that means this word is a very strong candidate for us to look into Dravidian, the linguistic ancestry of the Indus people. So it is of high credibility. And so there are various aspects of Dravidian morphophonemics of Pilu, like U part is the normal Dravidian enunciative that helps us to, pronounce Dravidian words, that is enunciative. The Pil part, either, as I said, as various Dravidian words have A versus E phonological variation. Like Kanavu, Kinavu is the word for dream. So Kana, Kina, Kanavu, Kinavu. Male cattle is called Kada, Kita, Kitavu, Kitae, Kadasu. That means A and E variation is very common in Dravidian phonology. And one of the words that is more prevalent and all, that will be normally reconstructed as the Proto-Dravidian word, but it's very possible that some other speech communities of a particular dialect will have the E-based version as well. So that is one kind of explanation for Pilu. And in Dravidian, we know that noun and adjectives are similar. Like soul means to speak, soul means word also as a noun and verb thing. So similarly, Pilu could have meant the tearing thing, the cutting thing, and also the thing that cuts, that is the tooth. Because in Dravidian, there is a very interesting word, pil, pilugu, etc., which also means cutting, tearing, crushing, etc. And in Dravidian language, there is a interesting way that verbs and nouns are correlated. Like karn means eye, karn means to see or to do. Kai means hand, and ke means to do. So similarly, pil, pila, pilaruka, etc. means to tear, split, pierce, etc. So from these verbs, it is possible that a noun for tooth, that is the primitive cutting weapon of an animal or human being, that is also coined. For example, in Dravidian, min means to, and m, min with the dirgha e, elongated e, means stars or fish, that is the gemstones which shine. So similarly, pill as a verb, the I could have been elongated to signify tooth. If we try to check Dravidian morphophonemics grammatically, and also similar things are there actually. In Sanskrit, we have jambha, that is tooth, task, or jaw, and that is related to the verb jump, and dangshtra, that is related to the verb dangsh. So these kind of possibilities are there. Also, this particular phonetical characteristic, will means bow, and will means to extend also. And then will means bow, and will, we all know, means also is a ethnonym of a bowman. That is the very good archers in Madhya Pradesh. That tribe is called Bhil. And some scholars say that there is a very interesting genetic relationship of Bhils, one part of Bhils with Dravidians. So these kind of things show us the various aspects of this word. I'll not go any more to that. As the keynote address you all have heard, there are many other proponents, Iravatam Mahadevan, Masika, Parpola, and recently Balakrishnan had a very nice book, Journey of a Civilization from Indus to Bhaigai, who have this Dravidian hypothesis explained in various ways. And as I said, this word came where it traveled from IVC to Near East. These Pilu or Pil-based words, and from ancient Near East, they actually remained. So in Arabic and Persian language, this pil and fil today are meaning elephant, right? So when in India, this Islamic rulers came, they again repopularized this word in form of pil, khana and all. And what happened that was in 13th century onwards. And then that possibly influenced some Indian philologists who said that, see, these designations, Pilupati, Mahapalupati, etc., like Kushana designations, which are having Iranian influence, like Dividapati, Gadjavara, etc. But they missed certain point, I think. Not all have missed. There's a very important, a paper by a Bengali linguist, Bakchi, who had actually talked about this quite a lot. Not in form of Dravidian thing and the archaeological evidence, but that this word had a Pilu word and Pillayar, etc. had a tooth-based coinage. But other philologists have always mostly because of this word Pilkhana, because you know what happens, I think the words change a lot, because these are not, the elephant is not a key core vocabulary word. So the words have changed a lot in India beyond recognition. A very good case study is Palaura, a very ancient city in Kalinga, which was Kalinga in ancient India was a very important elephant breeding place as given by Arthashastra. So this place was called Palaura, as we know from Ptolemy. But otherwise, this place is known as Dantapura. So Palaura is Pal plus Ura. Ur is the most prevalent Dravidian suffix of place names, Ur, Kur, etc. So this Palaura, Pal plus Ura, that is Danta city, is a city of ivory, which was a city from where ivory was sold with other places. So that got this name, but that slowly changed as Indologists Silva, Levy and other Indologists have shown, that changed to Dantapura. And in Mahabharata, that is called Dantakura, where the Pal or part has been changed to Danta already, but possibly the Kura part was not yet changed. So that shows how, in the time of Ptolemy, the Dravidian, according to Silva Levy, the Dravidian languages were disputing territory with Indo-Aryan languages. But I will say that that started much earlier, because in Mahabharata, Dantakura is present. So that means this kind of, the words change so much. And interestingly, as Masika has shown, that in Indo-Aryan thing also, the Ashwa, horse is always linked to Indo-Aryans. There's a controversy there, but mostly people say that, historians also say that horse and Indo-Aryan civilization in India is very much linked. But the horse's word Ashwa and all have got replaced with a non-Indo-Aryan word Ghotaka or Ghora now, very much in popular language. So similarly, I think the elephant words have changed, but that got again repopularized from the Islamic rulers, and there is a huge confusion that got created. But the origin of the word was actually IVC, and that is how the word got fossilized in that ancient Near East, and we have the word now coming back to us in other forms. I think I took around 1 hour, 5 minutes. So as I said in my other papers, Indus Valley script, Indus script cannot be read in a spelled manner. It is a semasiographic or chlorographic script where different signs actually signify different kind of words. Very possibly commodity names were there, and you see these particular symbols which are very visibly a tusk or tooth symbol. So they are found in many of the tablets and seals of Indus script, and possibly they signified ivory as well, because Indus script was used in hugely commercial context for trade and all. So that's a small thing. So because I never talked about Indus script in this whole talk, so that's I think today I conclude my talk, thanking you all for your patience, and any questions please ask.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bahata Ansumali Mukhopadhyay, laurels, florals, kudur, and 3 cheers for your most illuminating, enlightening, brilliant speech. It was enthralling and exhilarating experience for all of us. As you kept us enchanted and charmed and hypnotized for more than an hour. It was a multidisciplinary talk because it was very amazing experience for me as you dealt with the subject matter so easily covering so many disciplines. It was botanical at some moments, it was mathematical linguistic at another moment, from lexicography to archaeology to archaeogenetics to not archaeozoology properly, exactly, but you dealt with migration and sociology, then ethnohistory and mythology and trade and commerce so easily. So and we were spellbound to listen to you for more than an hour. And at the end of it, I have to confess that we have been, at least I have been more than convinced about the preeminence of the non-Aryan Dravidian element in the language of the Indus Valley civilization, which spread southern India throughout this Harappa and Mohenjo-daro and more than 1,500 sites spread over to Balochistan and then Afghanistan and of course to Oman and Mesopotamia, and the spillouts of the whole civilizational effort to the Gandhi Gaur tribe of Adivasis in present day India, and the Kudukh language of the Oraon people, Oraon Adivasis, who live also in, apart from Jharkhand and other parts of central India, also in Nepal and in India and in Assam, in the tea gardens of Assam. And we, at the end of it, we stand convinced that it was precisely a Dravidian language which was spoken there, and with maybe with preponderance of with some kind of sprinkling of other non-Indian languages like the Paramundari, Paramunda languages, and also might be some Tibeto-Burman Mongolian languages. And we are convinced it was not Sanskrit as such. No Rigveda was spoken in the IVC. So we were speaking of at the end of it, or at the middle of it, we were speaking of Kanabhu. I was fortunate enough to visit Kanabhu proper at Kerala. And so Kanabhu is a dream. So we are not sure, but we can dream. And we are being dreamers. We can dream the centenary of the excavation of Harappa is being celebrated worldwide. And in the coming year also, we look forward to the celebration of the excavation of Mohenjo-daro, 1922, 2022. And we look forward to a multidisciplinary approach to the enigma, to solve the enigma of the script of Harappa and Indus Valley civilization, and also the language. And your most touching, most exhilarating, most enlightening and thrilling speech would encourage us to look forward to a multidisciplinary approach. And Ilkhana of Sibsagar, near my district, where we are sitting now, towards Harappa and Mesopotamia beyond us, and Suniti Kumar Chatterjee's all references to the etymology, and our very own Kakotis. Dr. Banikanto Kakoti being a disciple of Suniti Kumar Chatterjee. And he was a disciple of Suniti Kumar Chatterjee as far as a concerned. Assamese information and development. In the line of Suniti Kumar Chatterjee's research Bengali language. I must admit or confess to the end that personally I am just amazed at your continuous, consistent, spontaneous, they prepared or wise reading out of a dissertation of a paper. Rather, it was spontaneous, poetic kind of a deliverance. So I admire and appreciate your presentation. And now I any question or any question who are present, who listen to you very aptly. So, question or question from the audience now. কোনোবাই কিবা সুধিব যদি সোধক।
Sir, I think there are more questions. Yeah, sir. So many people are observing and they're expressing their thankfulness to ma'am for her fine deliberation. And so I think there is no question at all here.
নাই কোনে একো মতামত বা কোনে
Sir, কোৱা নাই, কোনো question কৰা নাই, কিন্তু সবে মানে appreciate কৰিছে মানে, ভাল পাইছে সবে। বহুতে কৈছে sir.
সেইবিলাক মতামত আহিছে
Sir, এইটো message কৰিছে, হয়, ইয়াতে কৈছে।
সেইটো ফৰৱাৰ্ড কৰি দিব তেতিয়াহ'লে।
Yeah, sir, yeah. So বিদ্যুৎ বৰা, গীতাৰ্থী বুঢ়াগোহাঁই, অনন্ত দাস, ৰূপলেখা দেৱী, আৰ্শাদ আলম, দীপ্তি বৰুৱা, so in this way, নয়নমণি বৰা. So all of them are expressing their thankfulness to ma'am for her presentation. So I think we can proceed to the next agenda.
Mahfuza, please, vote of thanks now.
Thank you, ma'am and sir.
So we have come to the concluding part of our today's webinar. Firstly, I would like to offer my gratitude and thanks to our respected resource person, Ms. Bahata Anshumali Mukhopadhyay. Madam, you have delivered such an illuminating lecture. We are really enlightened by your speech. Once again, I, on behalf of the entire Jorhat College family, offer our gratitude and thanks to you. I also offer my special thanks to respected Rajiv Hendik sir, head of the Department of History, Guwahati University, and also our keynote speaker sir, our principal sir, Dr. Devavita Sharma. I also convey my thanks to all the participants across the globe for actively participating and investing your valuable time here. Last but not the least, I offer my gratitude to to Mr. Vijay Hazarika sir for providing technical support in running the program. Thank you, sir. At last, I want to conclude with the announcement that our third webinar of the webinar series will be delivered on 27th December. The topic, recent archaeological perspective on human-animal interaction during Indus Valley civilization, which will be delivered by Dr. Arati Deshpande Mukherjee from Deccan College, Pune. With that note, I'm concluding my vote of thanks. Thank you.
We conclude with these words of Mahfuza Begum, and we look forward to permanent and perennial, and I believe that long duration labor of Ansu, Ms. Bahata Ansumali Mukherjee Institute, and this series of international continue would come to a very interesting conclusion very soon. Thank you very much.
Sir,
Good
please ask all of them to submit a feedback form. So I'd
I
like to
request all the participants to fill up the feedback form. Then we can release the certificates for you. Feedback form is mandatory for having certificate.
Okay, I believe
so all
so
so all please submit the feedback form. It is available in the chat box.
that we can send the certificate.
Yes,
Thank you
sir.
very
Yeah.
much and very warm good night.
Thank you.
Hello.